CenterPoint standard reports have been designed so that you can easily customize the reports to meet your individual needs. I'm going to go through an example of some of the most common changes that users make to these reports. The standard reports in CenterPoint are found on the Reports menu underneath Reports and Reports. The report that I'm going to adapt is the one found underneath Transaction Reports and Payments, but the changes that I make are available on all of the reports. I'm going to highlight the report called Payments Journal Summary, and to the right, I'm going to make my report selections. The video on printing and previewing reports goes into report selections in more detail. I'm going to choose the date range of this year to date for my report. And then the other option that I'm going to select is to display the notation. I do want to see the notation for each transaction, so I have that option set to yes. All of the customization changes that we can make to reports are done on the preview screen of a report. So I'm going to click Preview. The toolbar across the top of the screen is also discussed in the Print Preview Report video. So you'll want to review that video for the options across the top of the screen. To customize a report, we're going to select the tabs to the left. The first one that we're going to talk about is the General tab. The most common change that most people will make to the General tab is changing the report title. You might want to change the report title simply because you don't like the way we call the report, and so you want to call it something that's more familiar to you. So I'm going to change this report to Vendor Payments. Now, before I make that change happen on the screen, some of the other options that you can change underneath the General tab are you can change where the date, time, and page number print on the report, or you could choose to not print them at all. You can also change the style of the report. One of the more common styles might be one of the font changes that people will choose. Perhaps you're adding a lot of columns to a report, and in order to get all the columns to fit, you might need to put it into a smaller font, so you can choose that option below. I'm going to leave mine at the default, but you can explore some of the other styles. Anytime you make a change to any of these tabs, in order to see that change displayed on the screen, you can either click the refresh on that tab or the refresh at the top of the screen. So I'm going to click the refresh at the top of the screen, and you can see that it's now changed the title of the report. The tabs for header and footer operate the same way. You can add or delete additional headers and footers, but that's not a real common change that people make to our reports. Maybe one of the things that they might do is for an existing header, they might highlight one of the lines and then change whether or not it's left justified, right justified, or centered, or they might change the font for it. But usually they're not adding headers and footers to the reports. We don't have any footers on our reports by default. We only have headers, and that's those lines that you see at the top of the screen there. Now, when I first previewed this report, I had added the notation to the report, and it added the notation as a separate line below each transaction. It is showing me the whole notation, but it's taking up some vertical space on the report that I might not want to do. So there are two ways to display a notation. This is one way. Another way would be to make it be a column. So I would rather make it be a column. So I'm going to change my report selections by going to the Filters tab. The Filter tab just lets me get back to my report selections and make those changes without having to close the report and come back in. So I'm going to say Display Notation, No, and then click Refresh, and it took that notation off. So it added, it consolidated my report and it uses less vertical space. But I do want the notation on there. So one of the things I said is that I could add different columns to a report. We're going to do that by going to the Columns tab. On the Columns tab, it has two tabs of its own. One is the Selected tab and the one is the Available tab. The Selected tab is going to show you all of the columns that are already displayed on the report. And in the order from top to bottom is the order that you would see them displayed from left to right on the report. I could add additional columns to the report by going to the Available tab. And I do want to add 2 columns. I want to add the column for account and I want to add the column for notation. So I'm just going to put check marks in those columns. And then when I click the refresh button, it will add those columns to the report. Well, if I don't like the order in which those columns are showing up, for example, I'd like to move account to next to payee before amount. I could go back to the columns tab and back to the selected tab. And if I want to change the order, I could highlight the column I want to move and either use the up or down arrows to change the order of it. So I'm going to move it above amount and then click refresh and you'll see that happen on the report. I do have control over other properties of these columns. For example, I could change the column heading. Over here, I have a right justified column coming up against a left justified column, amount and notation, and it makes it look like they run together. So I might add spacing between those columns. I also noticed that my notation column is getting cut off pretty early, and I'd like to show more of the notation. So I might want to expand that out. If you add too many columns or you make the columns too wide and it can't fit on a portrait-sized sheet of paper anymore, the system will automatically change it to landscape. And you can see that pretty easily if you go up to the top and you change your view to whole page. You'll be able to see the whole page and you'll be able to see that it is in landscape. Okay, so if I wanted to change some of those properties I talked about for these columns, I would go back to the Columns tab. And for the transaction number, I think I can make that column a little more narrow. So I'd like to change it to 0.75. But for the notation column, I would like to make it be 1.75 inches wide. So I just want to make it be a little bit wider. So I went ahead and changed those widths. And now if I hit refresh, it goes ahead and it makes this one be a little bit more narrow, and it makes this one be a little wider. Well, this one now, it's kind of crowding the heading. So I'm going to make that heading be a little more abbreviated so it doesn't make it be 3 lines long. So I'm going to go back to the column. I'm going to highlight transaction number, and I'm going to click on the down arrow at the end of that column. I want to make sure that I'm going to first change it to say just ref number instead of reference number. So I'm going to shorten it by doing that, and I'm going to click refresh. Well, when I do that, what happens is it kind of, puts check ref on one line and number down on another line, and that's not really what I wanted. I wanted ref to be with the number sign. So I'm going to go back there. And if I click on the down arrow on that column, I could add a carriage return. So if I position my cursor to just before ref and hit the carriage return and click refresh, now that column heading will say check reference number, and it looks a little prettier. Okay, and it did make the column for notation wider. But what it didn't do is it didn't add any spacing between those 2 columns. So that's a separate property. So if I go to notation, the property called padding would allow me to add some padding before that column. So if I just increase that number and click refresh, I now have some space between those 2 columns. The rest of the properties for columns have to do with any numeric columns. So if I go back to columns and I highlight the amount column, I can go to the settings options, and you can see where you have control over telling the system how many decimal places for a number you want to display, whether or not you want to use the currency symbol, how you want negative numbers displayed, whether or not you want to suppress 0 numbers. So you do have some options to format those numeric columns. And then the other option you have for numeric columns is whether or not you want to have a total in the group footer. I'm going to click refresh on this, and then I'm going to go down to the bottom, and this is a group footer. So if I didn't want this amount column to total in this footer, I could go back to that column and I could highlight it and just say total in group footer equals false, and that would take the total out of there. The other tab that you would make common changes to would be the Group and Sort tab. This particular report is grouped by bank account. I know that because I have a group header and a group footer. And while I'm only viewing one bank account, if I had additional bank accounts, I would then see a group header for the next bank account, all of the transactions for that bank account, and a footer for that one as well. So that's what the grouping does. But it's also sorted. So it's sorted first by this bank account, and if I had another bank account, it would be sorted after that one. Within that group, though, it is the transactions are being sorted by transaction date. So that's kind of the difference between the grouping and the sorting. Groupings do create a sort, but they also give you the header and footer, where a sorting is just changing the order of the transactions within that group or the data within that group. If I wanted to add my own grouping or sorting, I would go to the Group and Sort tab. And just like the Columns tab, it has a Selected tab and an Available tab. If I want to add a grouping for payee, so that I saw all of the transactions for a payee grouped together, I could go to the Available tab. And you can see here there's a lot of different fields that I could group the report on. I'm going to choose the one called Payee. And then I'm going to go to the Selected tab. Now, putting that check mark on the Available only makes it be a sort. In order to make it be a group, I need to put a check mark in the group. And then groups need to come before sorts. So I'm going to move it above the sort. When I click refresh, you'll see now that it is now grouped by bank account. And I still have, at the very end of the report, I still have my total for that bank account. But I also, within that bank account, have it all sorted by vendor and a grouping for each vendor. So I'm seeing each vendor, I'm seeing all the transactions for that vendor in transaction date order and a subtotal for them. Okay, so it's giving me the same information, but maybe more detail, and that might be what I was after. I'm going to go back to the first page of the report. Now, for these groupings, you do have some properties for those as well. So if I highlight a group, you can see where I can turn off displaying the group header and footer. I could just set those to false if I didn't want to display the group header or footer. I could change the text of the group header or footer. And I can also add a page break between different groups. And I can change for the sorting, I could change the order, whether I wanted it to be in ascending or descending order. So you have that for each group in each sort. Now, once you've completed the changes that you want to make to a report, you wouldn't want to have to go through making those changes again. So we do give you the option of saving those as a report favorite. I could either click the close button and it would detect that I've made changes to the report and ask me to save it as a favorite, or I could click the favorites button and it would prompt me to give that report a favorite name and save it. The report name is going to default to be the title of the report, but I can override that. If I don't want to override it, I could click OK and it'll save it to my favorites tab as that name. Now, as you save lots of reports to this favorites tab, it can become disorganized. So there is a different video on the favorites tab, which talks about sorting and organizing the favorites tab. But as you can see, you can make lots of different changes to reports to really customize them to fit your needs.